of our Business Intelligence webinar series for 2019. We are going to be talking about 8 wastes inside and outside of the office, and Jeff Woods will be the facilitator. So for those of you who are not as familiar with EZSigma, we have been around for nearly 20 years now in Canada. We're very proud to say that we are 100% Canadian, owned, operated, built, and brought up. As you can see from the screen, just to give you a bit of more insight, our vision and our mission. We do take it very seriously, and everybody here is incredibly passionate about process improvement, continuous improvement, and everything that goes along with that, including the facilitator and presenter for today, Mr. Jeff Woods. He has been in the industry for over 20 years, has great experience. He's worked in many different sectors, and he does a lot of our facilitating, especially for our public training programs. And I have no doubt that you will find what he's going to say today to be very valuable. Just a couple of housekeeping items though. As we're getting started, we just ask everyone to mute your phones just so that we don't have any background noise coming in. And at the end, there will be some time for Q&A. However, if you have a question and we don't get to it, feel free to write it in the chat box, and we will make sure to follow up with you following this webinar. So, Jeff, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Liz. And so we're going to initiate, this is our first session, as Liz mentioned, for 2019, looking at the 8 wastes. And as we start to walk down that path, I want to start by thinking about waste. So the first slide here looks at kind of the definitions behind it. As you read through this, you see things like wasting money, wasting words, wasting an opportunity, wasting time, if we think about it, wasting resources. And what we really want to do is we want to look at what are we doing and how are we doing things in our businesses, and what's the impact to our customers. So it kind of ends up coming back and looking at waste being defined as anything that does not add value for the customer. We think about what do we mean by value. We can look at it from a sort of technical perspective, process step, activity, or task that transforms the deliverables of a process such that the customer is aware of it and willing to pay for it is considered to be value added. Value always considered in the stated in the eyes of the customer. And that's really important. Often we think about our own businesses and we think we know what the customer wants, and we don't necessarily go back and validate our existing services or products or any changes that we want to make with what the customer is actually looking for and where they see the value. The better that we can align the proposition of what the customer wants with what we want to deliver, then the greater chance that we can align what they want to spend to what we need to charge for it. So that whole idea of what they need, want, and are willing to pay for. That sort of spreads out. We can also look at it in the public service or in healthcare. In public service, we start to think, well, what do you mean by pay for? And so we add the piece around what the community is aware of and willing to fund or pay for is considered value added. When we get into healthcare, probably one of the more complicated areas out there that we have. Fantastic area to work in, but it's a very complicated model. Lots of different people that have opinions, a lot of different stakeholders, and a lot of different people that have funding and have interest in that sector, which at times are actually fighting against each other. So it can be a challenge, but it's a great area of business. So when we think about value, then we can then step to breaking down various process areas, and so we break them down into value added, business value added, and then everything else, which is the conversation of today where we have the waste. So again, that value added are the things that the customer really needs, wants, willing to pay for, the things that if they knew we were doing these activities, would they be saying, yes, this is a good thing. We also have business value added or incidental work. these are areas where, the customer doesn't necessarily care that we do it, but there are things that we need to do because of law, regulation, safety, business administration, et cetera. And the sort of easiest example of that is, does the customer care that we have to do month-end reporting, that we have to do potentially sending money to the government, et cetera? No, they don't, other than they want to make sure that we're following the law and that we're staying in business. So as a business, we want to make sure we're doing those things as efficiently as possible and meeting those needs. And then really, if it doesn't follow into category 1 or category 2, then that sort of falls into category 3 or waste. And those are the things that we want to look at. So as we go through and identify the 8 wastes, one of the biggest challenges is even just seeing them, because often, we have the way that we do business, we have the steps in the process, we have what becomes just the way of doing the work. And we want to step back from our daily routine and actually try to put on a different sort of lens of how we look at our process and identify the things that are getting in the way of doing the work. So as we move forward, we start to look at those 8 wastes. And for myself, often when I'm working with groups, although the pure lean definition talks about them as being the 8 wastes, I like to think about them as the 8 lenses of how we look at a process. So once we whether we've mapped out and we sort of see what the process looks like, we can then put on our different lenses of how we look at the process, and we can look for the things like overproduction, defects, excess inventory, overprocessing, excess transportation, waiting, motion, and underutilized people. So as we can sort of look at each step in the process and say, well, at this step in the process, do I see overproduction? And kind of going through, we have little definitions on the slide, but if we sort of step back, overproduction, processing too soon or more than required, defects, errors, mistakes in rework, inventory or having too much inventory or holding inventory. And what's important to think about in inventory is that that's physical inventory, but also virtual. So we think about today, a lot of things live in our virtual world or on our computer systems. So we can have lots of excess inventory inside of that also. Overprocessing, where we're doing more than we need to do. Excess transportation. So if we start to look at how are things moving, is it whether that's physical or virtual information moving throughout our systems, or whether that is physical materials moving throughout our systems. Waiting, which is something that happens a lot in business, or we see it a lot, employees and customers waiting for things. Motion, excess movement of people. When we look at the steps, how are we situated? How are we organized? Do we have people doing more than they need to do to sort of be able to meet the needs of the customer around activities? Just because we have to do something doesn't mean it has to be difficult to do. And often we'll hear about the 7 wastes, but we like to think about the 8 wastes, and that 8th one is underutilized people, which is employees not leveraged to their maximum potential. And we'll talk about each one a little bit in more detail. I know that for many of you, we've been through this because you've been through our training courses, but it's nice to sort of step back here and reflect upon what these mean in our processes, because often we get back to work and we're just doing things. So the purpose of this series, and in today talking about the 8 wastes, is for us to remember and maybe go back and overtly look at what's going on a day-to-day basis in our own businesses, and purposely put on those different ways of looking at our processes and seeing what is going on a daily basis that's, again, getting in the way doing the work, what's preventing things from happening as smoothly as they can. If we go through and look at each one individually, overproduction, on each of the slides, what we have is we have some examples, and also at work, and some home examples. And what I'd like everyone to be doing is at the end of this is actually, or as we're going through the slides, reflect back on what would be examples within your own business. And a handy thing to do is to create your own sort of template of the 8 wastes with real life examples of what that means to you and your organization, your business, or your area of the business. And certainly if you're looking for a template that you can use to fill this up, complete this and keep it within your organization, you can reach out to Liz and she can provide you with that so that you can have something that is truer to your own organization. Because with any of the training we talk about, it's one thing to look at an idea or a concept. The other is, how does this work within my own business? So we always want to take any of the tools, methodology, and ideas and relate them back to what makes sense to you. So the more that you can do that, the better. So as we go through this, again, I really encourage you to think about, well, what would our examples be in our business? So in this slide, for example, we're talking about overproduction around information that's automatically sent, even when it's not required, printing documents that aren't required, processing items before they're needed, so that we're actually building that up as inventory before we actually need it, or we're working on things that aren't required, producing more than we need. An example might be that we produce a pamphlet, for example, and we're siloed in our organization. So we have the area that says, oh, I need pamphlets, and they put a request in and they may print 10,000 of them. And then you have the area that produces them, then the area that actually receives them. And at the end, you may have a different part of the organization that gets rid of the ones we don't use. So often we don't have that communication cycle to understand what our actual usage is. And so we overproduce the forms or materials or documents, whatever that is. Again, a continuing theme that you'll see is we run our businesses as silos as far as the areas in our business, but reality is that our processes go horizontally through those vertical silos. And the better we can have our communication links and the better we can have the flow of our processes and understand how they horizontally go through, the more in tune we can be with meeting the needs of the customers. Second one is when we talk about defects or rework, and that's really important. One of the things when we talk about value, when we talk about defects or anything that's going on in the business, from a lean perspective, it's not only doing something, but doing it right the first time. So that any time that we have an activity in our business that's being caused by an error or a defect or an issue upstream, then that really is all that activity is around the failure demand. So if we think of our days, everybody goes into work, we're very busy, but what are we busy doing? And that demand on our time breaks down into 2 components, one being value demand, so the things that are adding value to the customer and the business, and the other is failure demand, those things that we're doing because of a failure that's happened. So we may be very busy right now fixing something because we had a defect, or we're now delayed and we're not able to get products to the customer on time. So now we have calls coming into our call center because the customer is wondering where it is. So all those activities that are happening because something wasn't done the right time, done right the first time. And if we start to break down our day and analyze what's happening, it's often quite scary to see what percentage of our time is being spent in that failure area versus that pure value area. Again, and we think about the demand on our own time. So getting back to defects, again, examples here at work, missing information. We go to do something, but we don't have the information we need, which means we have to stop, go back, or request the information, or incorrect data entry where we maybe get the right information, but there's a breakdown in how that information gets put into our systems. Is it manual? How are we doing that? An example of an output is incorrect name printed on a credit card. Again, think about for yourself, what would be in your world, what are examples of defects? and start to kind of capture those things and build those out. Within each of these, we also have examples of outside of work, because reality is, and one of the nice things about lean and lean thinking is it can apply to all aspects of our life, whether that's at work or whether that's at home. So lots of examples down here at the home. I'd also like you to be thinking in one of them slides, we actually have you reflect on it, but think about how that impacts what's going on outside of work. And it could be as you see yourself as a customer, what are you experiencing out there? And what is the impact on your time that's caused by that? So defects, another one is inventory, excess inventory. And again, inventory can be virtual inventory or physical inventory. And often inventory is something that hides other inefficiencies in our organization. You know, we have too much of it, or we have a lot of inventory, which means that maybe we aren't as efficient of how we use those resources, which has a negative impact to the organization. But examples of excess inventory can be files and documents waiting to be processed. So we've got a big backlog, excess promotional material, overstocked medicines, having more servers. So are we matching the use of resources to what our needs are? Overprocessing, doing more than we need to do. And this is also a really interesting one, because again, getting back to the idea of the vertical silos across our business, we may be doing what our job description tells us to do, but have we really looked at it across, well, what at each step in the process, I've become a customer of the upstream process and I'm a supplier to the downstream process. So do I truly understand what the requirements are of who gets my services, whether I'm directly to the customer or often what I'm delivering is to another part of the internal business. So do I really understand what their needs are so that I'm delivering what they need, or am I doing more or less than what they're looking for? So from an overprocessing perspective, one step in the process may be getting more information, doing more than they need to for what the requirements are of the next step in the business. But we often don't realize that because we don't talk to the downstream part to find out what their needs are, and we often don't go upstream to talk to who's supplying us with information or materials or whatever that inputs are to our process. So that we may be frustrated that we get things late, that we get things incomplete, that we get things that are inaccurate or in the wrong volumes. But is the organization set up that it's easy for us to communicate up and downstream within our processes so that people are clear about what the requirements are? So again, often we might be doing something and thinking that we're doing a great job, but is it actually meeting the needs of our downstream next step in the process? Or are we collecting a whole bunch of information and then they turn around and really only want one piece of it because their step in the process goes back and gets that same information, where we then run into redundancy? Transportation, again, it can be physical or virtual materials that are moving. But when we map out a process, one of the great things about a swim lane process map is that we can really see the movement throughout our organization. So from where something starts because there's a need from a customer to where it ends, where we meet the needs of what they're looking for. Where do we see the movement within our own organization? Again, we often get caught in our own silo and we know what we do, but do we know what's happened outside of us? And again, that can be information. So you might have something that goes from a customer to a local office, then goes to a regional office, to go to a central office that takes care of that information so they can send it back to the regional office, to send it to the local office, to get back to the customer. And then we wonder why the customer sees that it takes too long to get, whether it's a service or information or a product. And each person within their own silo says, well, I didn't take too long, so it must be somebody else. But it's that whole flow across our business and understanding the impact from the customer's view of when they wanted something to when they actually got it. So often excess transportation ends up not only costing us potentially money and resources, but time. And we'll see that that can be a negative impact to our customers. So again, looking at excess attachments, excess handoffs within the organization as things move, again, whether it's virtually or physically throughout our business. Waiting, again, waiting is one that is prevalent throughout business. We see it every day, whether it's on the customer side where a customer is waiting to be served, whether it's at a contact center or we're queuing as a customer in a grocery store, patients waiting for a doctor at a clinic. So often we have customers that are waiting for things from us, but also internally we have a lot of waiting. So we have staff waiting for instructions, waiting for approvals, waiting for inputs, or if there were defects, they might be waiting for the proper materials or the proper information to get back to them. So what you'll see is a lot of these different lenses of how we look at our processes are interconnected. So an issue with waiting can be caused by a rework or other things, so they all are also interconnected. Motion or excess motion, we want to look at kind of what do we need to do to be providing the service? I mean, are we looking at for data, information, how do we set our offices up, or how do we set our factories or our areas to make it as efficient as possible, again, to meet the needs of the customer. So where do we have forms? Where do we have information? Are we searching for things? So if we have to go and find, whether that's, again, searching can be physical or virtual. We could be searching for a form or a physically printed form, or we could be searching for a virtual form on our intranet site, so that we're looking and moving around to get things. Motion, one of the tools that we can be using to identify motion is the spaghetti diagram. I think most people are familiar with that, where we would actually map out kind of what are the physical motions that are in play. On a larger scale, you could have a spaghetti diagram that actually looks at sort of transportation, so it could go beyond person movement to kind of movement across the business. So tools that we can use to try to identify those various issues. But motion is one of those things that, you know, we want to make it as efficient and as effective to deliver the services to our customers. And if we step back and look at how we're organized, does it make sense? Or should we be changing the way that we provide those services, or how we work together to reduce the motion, to speed up our ability to give the right information or right product to our clients or our customers? Again, whether that's the final external customer or whether that's internally to our internal customers. I mentioned before that we often hear about the 8 wastes, and in this case, so we look at underutilized people. And to me, this one is really, really important today. You know, when we talk about lean, when we talk about the culture, underutilized people really kind of jumps up, because, you know, when I think about how are we structured, so if we look at the examples here, lack of engagement by managers to use staff knowledge to understand issues and make improvements. So from a cultural perspective, as a manager, do I see my role as telling people what to do, or is my role to really understand what their challenges are? What are the things getting in the way of doing their work? What makes it difficult for them to provide the role they're trying to provide? And so my role in that is to really understand it and work with the people doing the work to continually make it easier for them to provide the product or services that they're doing. And therefore we have that sort of cycle of continuous improvement. So that if we can really drive that, that really helps the business. So those are kind of a run through the 8 wastes. And a couple of things to think about is the first step is really identifying and seeing the waste or seeing the issue. Because if we don't think about it as a breakdown, if we don't see it as something that's getting in the way, as I say, of doing the work, then we're never going to address it or do anything about it. So that first step is really pausing, stepping back, and again, think about putting on those 8 pairs of glasses to look at our process and say, what's going on in the process? And these are, the 8 wastes are something that's really easy to explain and to work with our staff. We don't need to have staff that are deeply knowledgeable in lean principles, but we can explain to them the 8 wastes or the 8 lenses. We can talk to them about what we want to do is really try to understand what's making it difficult for them to get the work done. And so through a simple, if we've mapped out our process, we can stop and look at each step in the process and say, at each step going through the 8 lenses and saying, well, do we have overprocessing that's going on here? Do we have overproduction going on here? Do we have waiting that's happening at this step? Do we have rework that's happening at these steps? And that really starts a great conversation with the people that are doing the work to understand what those challenges are. And if we can then identify what those challenges, then we can, as I see in the next part, kind of, once we've identified those pains, then we can quantify the impact. Because, you know, what's the so what behind the issue we're having? So is it, how important is it to, or what's the impact of having the delay, of having the rework? And once we quantify it and realize we should look at it, we can then look at the root cause analysis. Why is it happening? Once we understand those X's around the why, then we can look for potential improvements, implement, sustain, and in effect, run a small Kaizen event. That can come really effectively out of just going through and working with our staff or those around us or ourselves, looking at the 8 wastes or the 8 lenses. And really what I'd like people to kind of get out of the session is to, to sort of overtly go back, whether that's this afternoon, tomorrow, next week, and try to look through those 8 lenses, looking at our processes and identify these little things that are getting in the way of doing the work, and what can we do about them? And can we make tomorrow just a little bit better than today and get that cycle of continuous improvement going? And also what it does is allows us to get some wins and some improvements so that we can kind of get that push of the culture. Again, the 8 wastes is a great conversation and a great way to engage our staff because they're the ones that know the things that make it difficult. So it's a great way to initiate those conversations around what are their challenges? Well, what do you mean, what are my challenges? Well, we can talk about it through the idea of the 8 wastes. So this was a look at a particular concept within Lean, the 8 wastes. What I want you to think about is we have lots of different ways if you want to learn more. And many of you have been through a number of these different pieces, but we have open enrollment certification programs. We have corporate training programs, e-learning modules for certification and courses. We also coach and provide consulting services where we can come in and help you identify and help you work through what your challenges are to make your career and your business run better. Get information here around how to contact us. Just an FYI, here's our schedule for the year about the various events that we're going to be having throughout the year, starting today and going right through to December. Any information that you want around the future webinars, please reach out to Liz at EZSigmagroup.com. Really want to thank you for taking the time today. You know, kind of like a lunch and learn. So a number of you may have been eating while you're doing this or missing lunch because of it. So really appreciate your time and commitment to the continuous improvement and journey. And just want to open up if anyone has any questions or comments, or if there's been anything that's been put in on through the queuing, let me know. And just want to open it up if anyone has anything to say. Either everyone's speaking but they're on mute, or everybody's good. Everybody's good. Liz?
It sounds as though we're good. There were no extra questions in the chat room. So once again, we just want to thank everyone for coming out today. We will send out a copy of just the 8 wastes, so you can have that as a reference point. And if you ever do have any questions that maybe come up later this afternoon as you're thinking about the webinar or in the next little while, definitely feel free to reach out to us anytime, and we would love to answer those questions and help you out. So I suppose without any further ado, we will close off the webinar for today, and hopefully we will see you all again next month. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody, and have a great day. Bye now.
Thank you.